Well, hey guys, hello, welcome to Renewed Mind Bible Studies. Hey, I figure I'll just kind of open with a fun story. My mom's not here, so I can share it. Several years ago, when I was the youth pastor, my pastor had this great idea that we were going to read the entire Bible over Havelock. It was a great idea. Some of y'all remember that? So people would sign up, and they'd sign up for like a 30-minute or a 1-hour block, and we would start in Genesis, just read all the way through. And at this point, my little sisters, they're teenagers, so they come with my mom where she signed up, and she ended up in Song of Songs. And so in the foyer, with the door open and the speaker, she's reading Song of Songs over the speaker with two teenage girls, just laughing. She pushed through. But hopefully, if you were part of it last week, then you can already see there's more to it than just, some of the surface stuff that you think of when you think of Song of Songs. Last week was all about love that awakens. And so we say love that awakens, but let me just make this clear. I'll probably say this in some form every week. While primarily it is talking about romantic love, you need to know that romantic love, husband and wife, it's the most sacred of all human relationships. But this applies pretty well to all human relationships. Even with a friendship, there's something about them that draws you to them or makes you decide, I want to spend more time with them. There's things that draw you to them. That's when it awakens. How do you keep it? You have to pursue it. And that's pretty much what we're talking about tonight. So one of the easiest assumptions most people make is the belief that love of any sort, once you find it, is something that will simply continue on its own. I think sometimes, even though we wouldn't say it out loud, we assume that closeness will sustain itself, that we have a good foundation, and because we have a good foundation, nothing will ever change, and the reality could not be further from that. Song of Songs refuses to let us treat love as something that is taken for granted. So all throughout this next section, you're gonna see this common theme of movement. Love always moves. Someone comes near, someone calls out, someone responds, someone's searching. They're all on the move through what we're reading tonight. And like I was saying, that whole idea stretches beyond romantic relationships too. Friendships require pursuit. Have you ever been in a one-sided friendship? It's uncomfortable, unless you're on that side of the friendship, and then it's uncomfortable for them. Family requires pursuit, especially as you get older, dynamics change. And even our relationship with God includes pursuit, and that's not because God is hiding from us, but because all healthy relationships are built through intentional acts of growing closer. Because I like to read something that connects to these Bible studies from the New Testament. From John chapter 15, here is a very well-known scripture that Jesus shared. He said, I am the true grapevine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch of mine that doesn't produce fruit, and he prunes the branches that do bear fruit so that they will produce even more. You have already been pruned and purified by the message I have given you. Remain in me, and I will remain in you. That sounds pretty close, doesn't it? For a branch cannot produce fruit if it is severed from the vine, and you cannot be fruitful unless you remain in me. Even with your relationship with the Lord, it's not a fruitful relationship if you're not pursuing him, if you're not staying close to him. And so Jesus teaches that fruit grows through remaining, and connection always grows deeper through staying, and any kind of love you have with somebody always becomes strengthened through intentional pursuit. So as we begin this session, we're going to be learning that love is not just worth desiring, but it's also worth pursuing. And real good relationships, they just take work. There's no way around it. So let's go ahead and jump into it, starting in verse 8. We're going to talk about all the things we're going to learn tonight. The first one is to learn to move toward love. Well, now I get to see what it was like for my mom. She says, I hear my lover coming. He's leaping over the mountains, bounding over the hills. She says, my lover's like a swift gazelle or a young stag. Look, here he is behind the wall, looking through the window, peering into the room. And she says in verse 10, my lover said to me, rise up, my darling, come away with me, my fair one. Look, the winter is past and the rains are over and gone and the flowers are springing up. The season of singing birds has come and the cooing of turtle doves fills the air. The fig trees are forming young fruit, and the fragrant grapevines are blossoming. Rise up, my darling, come away with me, my fair one. Now, we will cover this in one of these sessions, but there is a lot of very intimate metaphors that are used all throughout Song of Songs. But just because we know that, I need you to know that not everything is a metaphor. I kind of got y'all a little on that last week when I said, you know what that means? It just means a flock of goats. But when you look at this, there is a deeper meaning here that is not all of a sexual or sensual nature. So as I'm sure you can tell, the energy of the relationship has changed here. Where we left off last time, they were resting in calmness under the banner of love. As a matter of fact, the last thing we talked about, she said she was resting under her lover's arm. But now she's calling out to him, and he starts moving and leaping over mountains. And so there's movement here, and there's anticipation, and there's excitement. And that woman hears his voice before she sees him, and she's excited over it. I don't know the last time, a lot of adults, we lose this. What's the last time that you felt genuine excitement when you heard something, smelled something, saw something? I mean, if it was a long time ago, think at least to like when you were a kid and you knew your birthday was the next day, or Christmas was the next day, or whatever it is. So what you can picture here is active and intentional love. Love that is not just recognized, it starts moving because it is so powerful. That's the whole vibe of what we're discussing in this section. And one of the easiest mistakes people make in relationships, here's your first blank, is assuming that affection automatically creates closeness. Affection automatically creates closeness. Attraction can awaken quickly, but connection only grows deeper through pursuit. Healthy love is never passive. That's not a blank, but I'm still gonna repeat it. Healthy love is never passive. Many times I've had a conversation with somebody who's maybe a little more advanced in years. They've loved the Lord for a long time, but they've settled into a routine rather than a deeper relationship. And the more years that you're together, you should be growing more and more intimately aware of each other. You should be growing in your understanding of a person or towards communication with them. The woman says, here comes my lover leaping over the mountains. Well, the Hebrew word that's translated as leaping is the word dalag. It's dalag. It means to spring or leap or to move energetically. To move energetically. Those of you who were here when Pastor Tom was here, do you remember the calf let out of the stalls? Okay, that's the kind of leaping, right? And if you weren't here, it's exactly what it sounds like. I want you to picture a guy leaping like a calf that's been let out of the stalls. The picture is somebody who's eager. He's not taking his time. He's not trying to be all well put together and seem respectable. He is pretty ready to get over there, right? And so the illustration there is powerful because pursuit changes how relationships feel. For people that don't feel loved, it's not normally because the person has said, we don't love you anymore. It's not normally because they were never loved. I want you to hear this. Most people that do feel loved, they feel loved because someone continued to show up and continued to tell them. It's interesting because it all comes so naturally in the first part of a relationship. Obviously romantically, because there's lots of flirtation and dating and things like that, but also in friendships. There's a lot that we communicate early on as we're connecting with people. And then we start to settle into the safety zone and it gets a little bit more numb. And so the man then calls out, rise up, my darling, and come with me. That Hebrew word that is translated into two for us, rise up, is the word kum. It means to arise or stand, awaken, or to move from one position to another. From one position to another. So he's actually calling her out from where she is. While he's leaping, he's saying, and you, let's get on with it too, move, right? And so throughout scripture, this word points to transition. Transition. Something that is changing, something that is beginning. That's the heart of this section. Love requires movement. It never forces it, but it does require it. And so that idea, like I was saying, is much more than romance. Think about moments in life where we become emotionally stuck. Think about those of us who have started to protect ourselves after a disappointment with somebody, or sometimes we withdraw after experiencing rejection. And we convince ourselves that distance is safer than vulnerability. But sometimes we remain where we are because we assume movement will only lead to more pain. But healthy love will challenge you to leave a place that has become emotionally cold. It doesn't mean that the past didn't hurt. It just means that staying frozen will always prevent your growth. As the man then starts talking about seasons, we can easily look at that and say, well, I understand winter and spring. You ain't got to explain that to me. Well, I'm going to. He says the winter is past, the rains are over and gone. That's because the Hebrew word that is translated as winter is stav. And by the way, this is the only place that this Hebrew word appears in Scripture. And it carries the idea of a rainy season. It wasn't just winter, but it was the season where rains happened more often. It's a season, in other words, where growth is hard to see. And because of that, we can see one of the most beautiful transitions in this chapter. Flowers then start to appear, birds sing, fruit starts forming, and the season changes. All throughout Scripture, seasons represent spiritual realities in a lot of places, and winter does not mean death as much as we may think that sometimes. It just means waiting. Spring doesn't create life, it reveals the life that was there developing beneath the surface during a winter. Probably 3 years ago, we talked about seasons of faith, and in the winter, it was the correlation was that trees are not dead in the winter, but all of their resources are on the inside, keeping it alive, putting the roots down deeper so that when the spring comes, they can actually flourish in a much more visible way. They're at work, you just can't see it with your eye. And that's important for different people in different stages of life. Married people might realize that pursuit has gotten replaced with routine sometimes in their marriage. Single people might realize that they've stopped allowing themselves to hope. And maybe widows or widowers might recognize that love has helped form who they are in a deep way and continues to influence how they connect with others, and that can be positive or negative. And even those that are healing from a broken relationship might realize that they've built walls that are so high that nothing healthy can get through them at this point. But Song of Songs is challenging you that love begins with a new opportunity to move again. If it's been winter, the Scripture wants you to know it can be spring. This section continues with this imagery of fig trees that are blossoming. The Hebrew word that's translated as blossoms comes from semadar. Semadar. It means early growth or tender blossoms. Tender blossoms. It's a Jewish term that signals that fruit is coming but not fully here yet, which means a vineyard's not mature. It's just saying that there is something beautiful growing from this. Healthy love understands seasons. Healthy love understands seasons, doesn't demand full fruit from early growth. It recognizes that relationships and healing and trust and communication and even emotional health all take time to develop. One of the more quiet dangers of life is assuming that because something mattered once, it'll continue flourishing without care. But Song of Songs is teaching us something different. Healthy love always notices distance and chooses to move toward connection. It always notices distance and chooses to move toward connection. Well, now let's just cover one verse, verse 14. This is learn to be seen. I've often said that I think for most people, one of their deepest desires is to be seen. And one of their greatest fears is normally to be seen also. It's one thing to be rejected for who you are. It's another thing to be rejected for who you really are. So the young man says this, he says, "My dove is hiding behind the rocks, behind an outcrop on the cliff. Let me see your face. Let me hear your voice, for your voice is pleasant and your face is lovely." Well, the movement slows down a little bit here because it becomes a little bit more personal. In the previous section, there was excitement and pursuit, and now the imagery is narrowing down to a single moment that is much more intimate than you would think at first. The man is describing this woman as hidden among the rocks and tucked into the cliffside like a dove. Well, healthy love eventually reaches a point where attraction is no longer enough on its own. And I'm not saying that over time you don't still feel attracted to your spouse or whatever, but it's just not enough on its own. Attraction can awaken quickly, but closeness always requires you to move on to something that has a deeper value. And at some point, every relationship encounters vulnerability. Maybe you're an Olympic grade hider of your vulnerability. There are some people that make a whole art form out of it. But I'm just telling you that the more you're around somebody, at some point something cracks and you will show vulnerability. You can't hide it forever. And there's parts of us that feel confident or capable, funny or productive. They can only carry connection so far. And then they're gonna see you on a bad day. And people start revealing fears, disappointments. Your blank is insecurities. Sometimes what we've been hiding has been grief or just places where we feel uncertain whether we'll be accepted if we're fully known. And so the image of the dove here is also intentional in this poetry. It helps us to understand what's happening because the Hebrew word translated as dove, yonah, it's used all throughout Scripture because doves are associated with gentleness, peace, and innocence and softness. I'm sure I don't have to tell you this, but doves are not aggressive creatures, at least not historically. I know there's always a story somewhere. But doves, they startle easily and they naturally seek shelter when they're threatened. In other words, this girl is excited, but she's scared and she's not sure if she feels safe, so she's hiding, right? That's the imagery. And the place that she's hiding is also important. That scripture says that she's hiding among the rocks and cliffs. The word for rock there is Sela, which refers to a cliff, rocky refuge, or a protected place. Protected place. That's important because essentially, I don't know if I'm safe with you, so I know I'm safe over here. You can see the connection to modern relationships, I'm sure. All throughout the Old Testament, that same word is used to positively describe places of safety and shelter, strongholds, and things like that. And that detail changed the way that I read this verse. As a side note, by the way, that is S-E-L-A. It is not the same as the Selah that's used in the Psalms. It probably does not come directly from the same word. I wondered that when I was studying this, but it is interesting that they are both moments that are meant to make you feel safe enough to think and reflect and pause. So I don't know, maybe they are connected, but most historians have not found a connection. If I'm wrong, the Lord will correct me one day. All right. Some people, I'm sure nobody here, but some people have learned to hide after disappointment. Other people learn to hide after they feel betrayed or criticized or rejected or when they're lonely. Some people hide after divorce or grief or just years of feeling unseen by people that they love. And some people learn to protect themselves by becoming impressive. Other people learn to protect themselves by becoming independent. And there's still others that learn to avoid vulnerability altogether because distance felt safer than disappointment. What's that saying? If you expect to be disappointed, you'll never have your expectations not met or something like that. It's a sad saying. Over time, these protective places can begin to feel normal even when they actually keep you away from deeper relationships and connections. So the response from the man is what makes this section so beautiful. He does not force her into the open, and he doesn't shame her for hiding. Instead, he says, let me see your face and let me hear your voice. That Hebrew word for see is ra'ah. It means more than simply looking at someone. It's the whole idea of perceiving or noticing, considering something or someone, or truly paying attention. Truly paying attention. And the word there that's also translated as voice is kol. Kol, it does mean voice or sound or expression, but more specifically, it means what comes from within someone. In other words, he's not just saying, I like the sound of your voice. He's saying, I want to hear who you are. So together, those words have this deeper picture than, just being physical attraction on appearance alone. He really wants to know her and not just admire her. So before she comes out from hiding, he tells her that her voice is pleasant and her face is lovely. In the Hebrew, that word that's translated as pleasant is arev. Arev, it means delightful, agreeable, or enjoyable to receive. So, in other words, affirmation comes before there's a full encounter or exposure to this situation. He's going out of his way to create safety before he demands intimacy with her. Guys, he's creating safety before he demands intimacy with her. So that principle also reaches beyond the romantic. Sometimes married people slowly begin hiding their emotions while sharing a house. They try to manage the emotions of the other adult. Single people can become guarded because of those disappointments and just try not to hope because hope is dangerous. Friendships can sometimes become shallow over time, and it's not because people don't care, it's just because they stopped allowing themselves to be known by people who used to know them better than anybody else. But renewing our minds means learning that known is not the same thing as being exposed. Known is not the same thing as being exposed. Healthy love always creates an environment where people can gradually stop performing for each other and just start telling the truth. To me, one of the strongest signs of emotional and spiritual maturity is not finding someone who never hides. It's becoming someone safe enough that others don't feel like they have to hide in the first place. All right, let's go on to verse 15. Let's learn to protect what matters. Learn to protect what matters. And to me, this is, previous to studying this book of the Bible, this is the defining scripture to me of Song of Songs. It's the one that has had the most use outside of romantic lessons. But here's what it says in verse 15. The young women of Jerusalem say this: catch all the foxes, those little foxes, before they ruin the vineyard of love. for the grapevines are blossoming. That's it. That's the whole scripture we're going over right here. You have to watch out for the little foxes. It's one of the most recognizable ones in Song of Songs, but it becomes much richer when you slow down enough to notice where it is. Before I go on, anybody familiar with that scripture? Has anybody heard that before, the little foxes? Okay, so the warning about foxes doesn't come from betrayal or conflict or any of those things like we were just talking about, the things that we go through that make us want to hide. All right, it appears that while the relationship is healthy, that's where the warning comes in. So that's your first blank, healthy. Love is growing and pursuit's happening and blossoms are here, but that detail changes everything because the warning's not about repairing something that's broken. It's about protecting something wonderful before the damage ever comes. Throughout Song of Songs, the vineyard is one of the more prevalent images for love. Earlier, last week in the study, we saw that the woman was described as neglecting her own vineyard. And that language was used to talk about her own life and condition. And here the image is back, but it's shared ground for both of them now. And the Hebrew word for vineyard is karem, which means cultivated land that's been prepared for growth and fruitfulness. Growth and fruitfulness. I don't grow things, but I know people that do. And from what I understand, you can't just pick a plot of dirt and decide to grow something there. Certain soils are better for other things, certain seasons, things like that. And so this is talking about ground and land that has been used specifically to produce things that are fruitful. And as a reminder, although we do know this, vineyards do not happen naturally. There are no natural vineyards in the world. There might be natural growth and plants and things like that, but a vineyard is much more organized and structured because they require intentional planning and attention and pruning and protection over long periods of time, which makes the warning about the foxes very practical for all of us. So that Hebrew word translated as foxes is shual, and maybe some of us imagine foxes as dangerous predators because, if you see one in your yard, it's rare today and you might be worried about rabies or whatever. Or maybe some of you think about that song, What Does the Fox Say? The understanding in the ancient world was much smaller than that. They were not scared of foxes. They had much bigger predators to worry about. But foxes were known for slipping in unnoticed to vineyards, and they would damage what was beginning to grow. They would chew on the roots of plants. They would damage the blossoms when they were still so ungrown that they couldn't be harvested. Essentially, they would stop fruit from being able to develop. And so they were not really dramatic enough to cause an immediate alarm. A farmer wasn't going to freak out if they saw a fox, but they would realize, oh, there's something I need to protect, because over time they could ruin something that had taken a long time to cultivate. They could ruin something that had taken a long time to cultivate. And that's why the instruction is not to abandon the vineyard or assume that growth is going to take care of itself. This scripture says, pay attention. That principle reaches far beyond the same relationships that we were talking about. We assume that trust maintains itself. We assume that because we're close at one point, that closeness will always remain. We assume that when we express affection, people will always remember that we expressed it that one time 14 years ago. Most relationships, I won't say all, most relationships that fall apart are not destroyed by one single dramatic moment. More often, distance develops through small patterns that seem harmless in the moment. Unspoken disappointment, neglected communication, constant busyness, comparison, frustration, lack of being intentional. I got more. Emotional withdrawal. Or maybe just assuming somebody already knows they are all little foxes. And they can slowly become foxes in the vineyard of your relationship. So that same principle applies spiritually as well. I just would not be a good pastor to not highlight this. Most people that drift from God don't really do it all at once. They don't wake up one day and say, forget him. More often, that happens with small compromises that become habits. Prayer starts being inconsistent. Scripture reading becomes occasional. Obedience becomes delayed, which really delayed obedience is still disobedience. Gratitude becomes rare. Nothing is catastrophic, but eventually people wake up and realize that distance formed and they're used to it. That's why this verse is so wise. We have to stop asking whether something is big enough to address. Maybe you've been there before. Hey, have you talked to them about it? No, it's not a big deal. Really? Because you just talked about it to me for 30 minutes. It's not big enough for me to bring up. We have to stop asking whether something is big enough to address and start to ask whether it matters enough to protect it. Matters enough to protect it. Song of Songs is reminding us that healthiest relationships are never built by those dramatic moments either. They're built by people who notice the small things early and care for what God has entrusted to them before damage has time to grow. All right, verses 16 and 17, let's learn to choose daily. How many of y'all have heard this before? Love is not an emotion, it's a choice. Yeah, it's a choice. You have to decide, it's a decision. I mean, there's some good emotions with it too, but ultimately, if you want to make this last in the long term, it's a decision. When she says, "My lover is mine and I'm his, he browses among the lilies. Before the dawn breezes blow and the night shadows flee, return to me, my love, like a gazelle or a young stag on the rugged mountains." After warning about the little foxes, the song turns back towards the relationship itself. The goal of protecting that vineyard was never about avoiding problems. It's about preserving the valuable things that are within the vineyard. And the woman, when she says, "My lover is mine and I am his," at first glance, that sounds simple. That sounds like a Valentine's card. But it is a pretty deep statement there because you remember just a few verses ago, she's hiding and he's having to call her out and say, "Hey, this is safe." Now she's saying that there's mutuality to this. And this is the first time in Song of Songs that belonging becomes the focus. That belonging becomes the focus. All the way up until now, there's been attraction and admiration of each other. There's been pursuit. There's been love and affirmation. But here the relationship starts to become more settled. And the language becomes less about discovering each other and more about choosing someone. Choosing someone. That Hebrew word that is translated as "my lover" is dod. It's a word that's just connected to affection and belovedness or intimacy. Intimacy. Earlier in the study, we saw that word also carried the idea of warmth and attraction, but here it appears alongside the language of mutual belonging. It's interesting how many ways they would use the same words, but they had different connotations. There's only, if I remember correctly, about 3,000 words in the ancient Hebrew language. And so they were real creative in the ways that they applied this. And so if you notice, she doesn't just say, "He's mine," she immediately adds, "and I am his." It's not one person consuming the attention of another, it's shared devotion. And I think that matters a lot in a culture that speaks about love almost entirely through the lens of feelings. Go look at the love cards. I mean, the next time that we're near Valentine's Day, go read about it and the things about how you make me feel and all of this. I mean, well, feelings are great, but how many of y'all know that the person you love the most generally has the most ability to create other emotions in you too? And they're not all positive, right? Feelings awaken love, but choices strengthen it. Choices strengthen it. Attraction might introduce people to one another, but being intentional is what teaches them how to remain because they feel like they belong. And isn't it also interesting that this section appears almost like immediately after the warning about protecting the vineyard? I don't think that placement is accidental. Healthy relationships are not protected because they're fragile. They're protected because they're valuable. And so you should not have to protect something just because you expect it to fail. If I don't do this, she's gonna not love me anymore. If I don't do this, it's gonna fall apart. No, you should protect it because you want it to flourish. That's why we protect those that we love. And the verse continues on by saying, "He browses among the lilies." That word that is translated as browses is ra'ah. It means to tend or to shepherd. To shepherd, to pasture, to feed or care for. That's the same word that often appears all throughout the Old Testament in shepherding language. The whole relationship has another layer of meaning here. That image that we're picturing here is not just enjoying beauty, it's remaining close enough to be able to care for it. Just remember that learning that lasting love in your life is not built by finding someone who always makes us feel something. It's more built along the lines of ordinary moments where people continue to move towards each other because we learn that we can rely on each other and we know that we belong. Well, the last section we're going to look at is the first 5 verses of chapter 3. This is learn to keep seeking. It's not just choosing every day. And you hear this word a lot in my sermons, but you've got to be curious about other people. You want to have good friendships in a church, in a community, you've got to be curious. And by the way, I would just tell you, the more different they are, the more curious you probably should be. You don't have to change your mind, but do you not want to know what makes them tick? I can't understand not wanting to know it. All right, here comes the uncomfortable verses. Ready? One night, as I lay in bed, I yearned for my lover. I yearned for him, but he did not come. So I said to myself, I'll get up and roam the city. Searching in all its streets and squares, I'll search for the one I love. She says, so I searched everywhere but did not find him. The watchmen stopped me as they made their rounds. And I asked, have you seen the one I love? And then scarcely had I left him when I found my love. And I caught him and I held tightly. She said, I brought him to my mother's house and to my mother's bed where I had been conceived. It's a little specific. Verse 5 says, promise me, O women of Jerusalem, by the gazelles and wild deer, not to awaken love until the time is right. Does that sound familiar? So this section closes with the movement of pursuit in a way that feels very different from where it began. Before, he's leaping over mountains, she's hiding all bashful in the rocks, and all of a sudden she's like, hey, where is he? And she decides to go and search for him. The tone has become very different here. Instead of someone coming toward her, now she finds herself searching. But let me ask you this, do you think she's grown in confidence in her relationship at this point? The truth is that pursuit matters a great deal more after love awakens, rather than the initial falling for you process. And that's your first blank. It matters a great deal more after love awakens. Why? Because it's so easy to pursue someone when they're new and exciting and you're figuring out things. But when it's deeper work and it's harder work, pursuit matters so much more. And I also want to say this because when I first read through this, I thought, well, this is a little weird because it seems like they've just had a great time, whatever they did. And all of a sudden she's looking around, where is he? And it seems like he's abandoned her. But remember that Song of Songs moves more in a poetic way than it does in a strict chronological timeline. So this moment should not automatically be read as he abandoned her, like they had a fight and he had to go like cool off or something like this. This is just meant to reflect longing for him. She has found that she used to be okay being alone. She used to be okay being distant. And now she doesn't like it so much. And remember, there's no phones or quick communication options. The reality is that love is awakened deeply enough in her that when they're not together, an absence is felt, and she had to do something about it. Okay, so that Hebrew word translated as yearned, or maybe in your translation it might say searched, it is bakash. Bakash, it means to seek or pursue, to look for or desire. That word appears all throughout the Old Testament to not only searching physically, but also for intentionally seeking after something of value. And the repetition, when it's used for these two different words here, really does matter because she seeks once and then she seeks again. She recognizes that what she has found has value and it's worth trying over and over again if the first time didn't work. And that's, to me, a really big contrast to the way a lot of people think about relationships or even their spiritual life today. I think to me, as I talk to people, a lot of times there's this feeling that if something's healthy, it should always feel effortless. As a matter of fact, as Cassie and I were first falling in love, we used to always describe it as, man, it feels effortless because we were so into each other. And to be honest, I mean, I never think about doing something else or going anywhere else, I promise. But the reality is, could you look back on the last 16 years and say it's been effortless? I would call it effortful. You are a delight, and true delights are worth double the effort. So, listen, I mean, a lot of times we feel like, well, if you know, it shouldn't be this hard, love shouldn't be this hard. No, anything worth having is worth putting in sweat equity. What do you mean it shouldn't be this hard? It's going to take work. Scripture regularly presents growth as something that is active. Gardens require tending, vineyards require protection, cars require maintenance. Wisdom requires seeking. You don't one day wake up and become wise and then never have to seek wisdom again. If you're actually wise, you keep searching wisdom because you start figuring out all the things that you don't understand. Therefore, I would submit to you that relationships require even more movement. When she says, I'll get up and I'll roam the city and I'll search all the streets and squares, that word roam, it's not in your notes, but it does have the idea of circling or moving through. When I say circling, you can't do a circle unless you end up where you started. Right? So she is willing to search and search again. That's the idea conveyed here. And that image also is worth thinking about. We've watched love move in different directions. Someone crossed mountains and someone invited another one forward and they came out of hiding and someone protected things that are growing. Right here, you can see that someone chooses not to stay passive when the connection gets interrupted. Not to stay passive when the connection gets interrupted. In other words, they were having really good communication, really good time, and all of a sudden now something has interrupted it. And she doesn't take it and automatically say like, well, then he didn't get my attention anymore. She said, I'll close the gap. I'll close the distance, right? Married couples will eventually learn that closeness sometimes requires returning to conversations. I'm so sorry, guys. But sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes you have to return to a conversation. Sometimes you have to rebuild the rhythm that you guys had originally set, and you have to start moving towards one another again. Those of you who are not married, I would just tell you, it is healthy when you realize that relationships are not found by withdrawing emotionally altogether. I'm not saying don't exercise wisdom, but how will you ever be known if you don't open yourself up? People who have lost a spouse, they understand more than many how love leaves marks on the soul that will keep influencing you. And friendships, I'll just tell you, friendships don't grow deeper on accident. Spiritually, a lot of believers know what it feels like to go through seasons where God himself feels quiet. But here, she encounters the watchmen of the city, and the watchmen were people assigned to stay awake while other people slept. I think she ran into them because they were the only ones awake. But they're protecting and they're observing what's happening around them, and it's interesting that she asks them if they've seen the one she loves, but she doesn't even remain there long. She continues until she finds him. Most of us would be like, well, I filed a police report. They'll call me if they find anything. She said, you haven't seen him? I'm gonna keep looking. Does she seem focused on it? I mean, I think she seems focused on it. Even the phrase, the one I love, comes again from that word, ahav, which means love, affection, devotion, or a relational attachment. That word appears repeatedly throughout Song of Songs, and remember that love in this book is not treated in a lighthearted way. It always carries so much intentionality. The section closes with the words that I said you were gonna hear several times, that we've heard before, promise me not to awaken love until the time is right. That warning returns here, and it's specifically placed there because pursuit is not permission for impatience. Impatience. Desire still requires wisdom, and love still requires timing. So even as she is almost frantically searching the area for the one that she loves, it is intentionally placed there. Okay, you can look, but don't awaken it until the time is right. One of the greatest signs of maturity is not that you never experience distance from those that you love, but it is refusing to stop seeking what is worth finding. If you're watching on the Liberty live stream, we're gonna go ahead and cut the stream here, and we'll start with some table talk, and then we'll end with some worship tonight.